Hello friends. We are covering third chapter called Understanding Experience. Start. Experience and knowledge. In the context of both natural and social sciences, the relation between experience and knowledge is a difficult yet recurrent theme. The basic contour of this debate is as follows. It seems to be the case that without any experience, there can be no knowledge. By experience, I mean the world as experienced through our senses. Our senses are the windows to the world, and our senses appear to each one of us as an experience of the sensations. For example, the color of tree is available to me through my visual sense, and the color is experienced by me in a particular way. Thus, even though we may think we are all seeing the same color, there is no guarantee that the way I experience that color is the same as others do. At least, this is the dominant argument for some philosophical tradition. In many epistemological traditions, the suspicions toward experience is encoded in a different way, such as placing emotion against reason and the intellect, and the mistrust of first person report as opposed to a collective one. These suspicions also lead to a skeptical and dismissive views toward art. Fundamentally, the problem is that there is no guarantee for truth or falsity of experience, and hence experience in itself cannot be justified. Part of this problem has to do with the way one defines knowledge. In the Western tradition, largely influenced by early Greek views on epistemology, there is a clear distinction between theoretical knowledge and practical knowledge. Echo of these are found in the theory empirical distinction. Following Plato, knowledge is characterized by its capacity to be justified and to go and to guarantee certainty. This leads to a long tradition in Western thought that distinguishes between the ideal form of knowledge, as in formal logic and mathematics, as against empirical forms of knowledge, as in the sciences. Until the beginning of modern science, knowledge was primarily associated with certainty attained by empirical knowledge, and it was the influence of the chemist Boyle and the physicist Newton that legitimized scientific and empirical knowledge. One cannot underestimate the importance of this Greek view of knowledge. Ideas of necessity and absolute certainty inform this view of knowledge. Truth in logic and mathematics embodies these virtues. These forms of knowledge are independent of input from the world and are quite indifferent to the way our world actually is. Thus, the idea of possible becomes an important marker as against the idea of actual. One can then rephrase the meaning of necessity by claiming that necessity is what is true in all possible worlds, a view that is dominant in contemporary philosophy, and what is true in all possible worlds cannot obviously depend on the way our world is, and hence empirical knowledge of the world we inhabit cannot in any sense be the ideal form of knowledge. The conflict between these forms of knowledge lead to a long debate between rationalism and empiricism in Western thought. On the other hand, is the rationalist belief that knowledge should be grounded in mental capabilities, and on the other is the empiricist who would insist that knowledge be grounded in a sensory experience. A strong version of rationalism would claim that ultimately all knowledge can be derived from the mental capacities alone, and strong version of empiricism will insist that all knowledge can be reduced to the sensory input alone. Interestingly, such distinction between rationalism and empiricism does not occur in the Indian philosophical traditions. For example, the formulation that define necessity in terms of being true in all possible worlds would not be acceptable to these philosophers, for the simple reason that there is a strong streak of empiricism in all Indian philosophical tradition. Their view of knowledge is not based on an ideal notion of logical and mathematical knowledge. In contrast, both Indian logic and mathematics are themselves empirical. Experience is thus the ultimate grounding of all Indian formulation of knowledge. But but in saying this, we should note that their understanding of experience is broader than that used in the rationalist and rationalist rationalism empirism debate. The rationalist critique of the experiential basis of knowledge influences modern epistemology, including the epistemologies associated with the natural and social sciences. In particular, it privileges knowledge making that try to erase the presence of experience. Even in the empirical sciences, the role of theory has often been seen as a something that transcends experience. Theoretical structure like the structure of logic, mathematics, or syntax are superstructures that order the empirical experience. Hence, the essential idea of knowledge is something beyond or behind or before experience. Therefore, invocation of experience in scientific description is a taboo. Natural science has been very successful in eradicating not just a personal experience but also the individual herself. The rhetorical strategy of scientific writing that does not allow the author to use I in a scientific paper is a constant reminder of this attempt to keep the individual out of the knowledge claims of community. Scientific theory is a continued attempt to replace the experience of the individual with properties that belong to the world. This approach has influenced social sciences, but it has been successful only to varying degree. I will discuss the relation of theory and experience later in the books. Here I will restrict myself to the comment that this attempt to keep experience out of valid knowledge impacts social science much more than it does natural science. Kant's response to the problem of experience is also helpful in addressing the relation between experience and knowledge. The most important insight that we can take from Kant in this context is that our experiences are intrinsically related to our cognitive capacity. While the external world may catalyze our experiences, the final structure of our experience is built from innate cognitive structure of understanding. Thus, certain a priori concept order the sensory input we receive, and that order input is what constitute our experience. In this sense, our experience is already conceptually feel, and this concept do not derive from the external source of experience but from our internal cognitive structure. In this description, there is no explicit invocation of the individual subject, since the a priori concepts are not subjective but rather are universal structure of human understanding. Although, in a sense, Kant would be seen as belonging to a phenomenologist tradition, it is Husserl's phenomenology that develop a complex reading of experience and its relation to knowledge. For Husserl's and in general for the phenomenological tradition, experiences is all that there is. Everything that we say about the world has to be discovered in our experiences. But this does not mean that what we discover in these experiences is purely subjective. In fact, a most important insight from Husserlian phenomenology is that the very idea of the objective is particular subjective experience of the world. That we believe there are objective and subjective worlds is a unique characteristic of our experience. To assume that somehow we have access to the idea of objectivity outside our experiences is a completely mistaken notion. We should remember that for Husserl, phenomenology was the highest of the sciences. It is the science of sciences, a pure eidetic science. What we discover in our experience are essences, and these essences are indubitable. Moreover, there is a method, the much maligned phenomenological method that help us discover these essences. These essences are the highest form of knowledge, and they have to be extracted out of experiences. Thus, the phenomenological approach to experience, related experience, and knowledge in a intrinsic manner. Indian philosophical tradition are fundamentally phenomenological tradition. Their major concerns are about experience, consciousness, the self, and related notion. Their description is fundamentally cognitive in character. Even logic is described cognitively. Immersed in experience as it were, it is difficult to isolate experience itself as a special category, as it happened in some modern Western tradition. These particular views on experience in the Western tradition are a response to a specific history of the debates between empiricism and rationalism. Kant, as is famously known, attempted to mediate these two views. In the Indian tradition, such a neat distinction between the empirical and the rational does not develop. The rational and the empirical are intertwined, just as latter day phenomenology understand the intertwining between experience and knowledge. This intertwining is illustrated in the words used for experience in the Indian languages. The most common word for experience in Indian philosophy would be Anubhava. Although many writers ranging from Matilal to Ramanujan points out that there is no exact semantic match between Anubhava and experience. Anubhava is closely related to the notion of the self, and so Indian thought it is impossible to talk experience without invoke the self. In Western tradition, where such a distinction is made, we can note a parallel between experience and knowledge in the following manner. In modern tradition, particularly in the period corresponding to the establishment of modern science, the knower is differentiated from the known. Consequently, the experience is not invoked in account of experience. The very nature of experience is such that there is always an experiencer, but our description of that experience may or may not invoke this experiencer explicitly. It is interesting to note that the commonly used terms for experience in Indian languages exhibit the intrinsic relatedness of experience and knowledge. In Tamil, one commonly used word for experience is Pattirivu, and in Bengali it is Abhigyota. Both these words for experience have explicit connotation of knowledge in them. Even in common parlance, it is difficult to find words for experience that do not have terms for knowledge, skill, or wisdom, like arivu, stitched into them. So also is the case with anubhava. There is a similar analogy in German. The two words for experience in German are Erfahrung, Erfahrung, Erlebnis. The latter is specifically coined term that denote live experience, but both these words have a sense of live within their semantic space. Live experience suggests in an immediacy that is not present in the other idea of experience, which is already refined through reflection, conceptual structure, and so on. The basic point I am making here is that the world for experience in different languages exhibit hidden presuppositions about experience. Experience in English does not have a sense of life in it. As is well known, this word is derived from Latin experientia, which among other things support the meaning of proof and experiment. One can, along this trajectory, see this explicit connection of knowledge with experience. But over time, this connection has been drastically modified in the Indian uses of the term because of the explicit presence of synonym for knowledge in the world for experience. This relation is always evoked when one talks about experience. The intrinsic relation between experience and knowledge is reinforced through the explicit relation between the knower and the known. This relation has to be broken for modern knowledge science to be possible, since if this relation were to hold, then the morality of the knower could be seen to influence the moral status of the known, and thus lead to difficult questions such as the following. If Dr. Mengele, the infamous Nazi doctor, discovers some medical truth following his experiments on the Jews, should that become part of our knowledge system? should knowledge be intrinsically associated with the morality of the knower and with the ethics of means of acquiring that knowledge? Modern science become possible only after the splitting of the knower and known relation. See chapter 6 for longer discussion. Similarly, just as the knower known distinction was created, so also was the experiencer experience relation broken to allow us to talk of experience without the shadow presence of the experiencer. As a consequence, we talk of experience as if they are independent entity and as if they are available to us without the experiencer. Guru's argument, chapter 1, about the practice of social sciences in India today can be seen alongside this historical debate on the importance of knowing subject as well as the experiencing subject in any evaluation of knowledge and experience. However, there is another philosophical debate that has brought back the relevance or the uniqueness of experience. This is an argument that claims that there is a special knowing that is present in first person experience that can be had only by the person who has that experience. This is an argument that is often referred to as the knowledge argument regarding qualia. Basically, this is a claim that even though someone might have all the physical knowledge about the particular event, that person will still not have the knowledge of what it means to have experienced that event. In a sense, this is the argument that experiences cannot be reduced to some physical correlates. Some well-known examples are these. Even if all information about a molecule like ammonia is known, one still cannot know how it would smell just from this information. Jackson offers a variation of this argument by arguing that knowing everything, all physical description of color is still not complete knowledge about that color, since the experience of that color cannot be known just by knowing the physical information about color and the human sensory apparatus. The basic point here is that experience has an associated body of knowledge that is available only to the experiencer. Nagel, in another influential rendering of similar argument, point out that it is impossible to know what it is like to be a bat even though we may know everything about the bat's sonar apparatus. The point about all this example is that having a subjective experience is epistemically special. There is some knowledge in an experience that cannot be had by those who do not have that experience. This is yet another way of approaching Guru's challenge posed in the earlier chapter. Thank you. We'll continue further.